Hello and welcome to the EuroZone podcast, a podcast about European Ultimate. As we discussed last week, things might sound a little different because I am not Ravi Vasudevan. I am Sean Colfer, the European editor for Ultiworld, and I am going to be taking you through this season in Europe. As we discussed last week, there was a couple of interesting tournaments that took place. Vienna Spring Break with some teams of note in the Open and Women's divisions. There was an intriguing mixed round robin in Frankfurt between the four kind of favourite teams for the EUC. And we've got a couple of interesting tournaments coming up, not least another invite tournament coming up this weekend. We will get to all that kind of stuff first. But first, I want to introduce our two guests. I am joined by Benjy Rees. Benjy, how's it going?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you, Sean?
Doing well, thank you. Doing well. Getting used to the new seat, you know. And also joined by Christina Obermayer. Christina, how are you?
Hey, I'm also well. Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Very welcome. So, as I said, we've got two tournaments to kind of recap and look back at here. I think let's start with Frankfurt, the Frankfurt Invite, because EUC is before EUCF. We've got a limited window to see how these teams develop. And also, it was just a very interesting weekend between four of the best teams in Europe. So we'll talk briefly about what happened in Frankfurt. There was four teams there: Germany, Great Britain, Ireland, and France, as the kind of commonly associated with the top four teams in Europe. There's a couple like Latvia and who might be able to break in there as well. But those are the top four that everyone kind of expects to be in the running. Last week when we predicted it, Ravi, Liam, and myself picked Germany, GB, and Ireland in various combinations as the top three. France won, so obviously it shows how much we know in the early going. They were reasonably convincing as well. 4-0 record, points difference of 16. Ireland were runners up. They lost to France twice, but they beat Germany and GB, 3 and 5 point wins respectively. Germany beat GB twice. There was a universe point win in there. Sounds like it was pretty close games all around, other than a France-GB game, which was relatively one-sided. But outside of that, everything was pretty close. What do we take away from this tournament? Let's start with you, Benjy.
It's interesting seeing France come number one. They're kind of, I think, maybe a little underrated coming into it, given that they lost the final last time on Universe Point in one of the craziest Universe Points I think any of us have ever seen, right? How do you get a gender mismatch on Universe in the Euros final? Anyway, that's by the by. There's been a bit of a rotation through. I was really interested to see how they kind of bridged that slight generational divide. Like, I think two of the big players on the male matching side, you've got Gaël Ancelin and the seemingly ageless Nas. Like, he's been at the top level for God knows how long. Whereas I think a lot of French strength on the women's side is probably skewing a bit longer, like the Bourneau sisters. But, I mean, to win everything comfortably is a really strong sign. You do wonder whether this is, quote-unquote, peaking too soon, whether they showed their full hand and other teams did not, perhaps. But certainly it puts them, I think, a lot more at the front of people's minds than perhaps we thought, especially with how the draw for EUC shook out.
Yeah, it definitely looks that way. It looks as though they're coming in strong. Your point about people keeping things under their hat is an interesting one. I don't think anyone expects any of these four teams to have thrown out every offense and defense they're going to be using at EUC. That wouldn't make a great deal of sense, would it, Christina?
No, absolutely not. I think you have to have some tricks up your sleeve. But talking about France, they were at the World Games last year, and everyone kind of thought they were an outsider, maybe not. So they did perform better than most people expected them to. And I do see many people coming there again. I don't think Nas played at World Games, but he was traveling with the team, maybe coaching as well. And therefore, maybe they just had this first run of how do we work as a mixed squad? How do we as France want to represent Ultimate in the mixed division, and perfected that at World Games and are ready to build up on that for Euros.
Yeah, as you say, France going to the World Games. The 6 members of the World Games team on this mixed team, 4 of those on the female matching side, from talking to teams that were there, talking to players that were there, it sounds as though the female matching players, the athleticism that France brought was extremely difficult for other teams to live with, which, if you bring in 4 World Games players, that's not necessarily that surprising. But it's going to be interesting to see how France build up and how they go from here, because this, as Benjy, as you said, they came in kind of as underdogs a little bit, whereas now, as this might have turned it on its head, they might be people looking at them thinking now they're a proper medal threat. As you said, they made the final last time, they won a silver. People thinking maybe the other 3 were favoured going into EUC. This might increase the target on France's back. Not that I'm sure they'll mind. Coming out with 4 wins from a weekend is pretty good. Turning to the other teams, we start with GB because the reigning European champions have never lost an EUC in the mixed division. 4 losses here, but it sounds as though they were somewhat compromised with numbers. Only 6 men and I think 8 women for a lot of the tournament.
For them, there's still a lot that they can learn from the weekend, even though obviously results on the field didn't go their way. Maybe it's an opportunity for players to step up into slightly bigger roles. Obviously, you hope everyone stays fit throughout the campaign and when you get to the tournament itself. But, there's the chance that injuries happen. Maybe players need a rest or something. And having the ability to show what happens if, maybe this player we're relying on as a reset hander, it's up to them to step up and marshal the offense. This person who's more of a continuation option, they're now going to be like a first cut, a priority player. And again, you still get a look at other teams. Maybe it gives you a bit of a chance to tinker with and fine tune matchups. And when you're taking probably 2/3 max of a squad and you're still generally hanging close with other teams, I think GB will probably still view that as a positive.
I think, to be fair, it looks from my Instagram searching anyway, it looks like there was a wedding. So that took out several of the male matching players. So there's lesson number 1. Don't plan weddings during big tournaments. Hopefully nothing planned during Euros.
To be fair, it's quite hard to not plan your wedding during tournaments when we look at the schedule now and then there's a tournament every weekend. You have to make some sacrifices. If that was the weekend to make a sacrifice, maybe this shows a little bit of how important it was for GB to be part of this tournament as well.
Could be. Certainly is difficult finding a wedding weekend outside of the Frisbee calendar. Says somebody planning a weekend in early spring. Sorry, Benjy.
Yeah, who wants to get married in the UK in the middle of winter? Probably not many people. Let's just be real about it.
If it's the Alba guys as well, it's planning a wedding in Scotland, so even more so. Looking at the 2 teams that made up the middle, Ireland, we hadn't really seen as a strong mixed team for a while. They won a silver in 2015, but in 19 they were focused on open and women's. Obviously, the women's team won EUC that year. Coming back together as a mixed team here, looks like they're about as strong as we expected, given that they're bringing in players from Gravity, Ranelagh, other club teams that have been really strong. They're going to be a problem at Euros, but it's an interesting sign early on in the season, Christina, that they are beating Germany, because as we saw in the show where we kind of saw all the pools when it was all revealed, we have got Germany against Ireland as a pool matchup, so it's going to kind of dictate things very early on. So interesting to see they've got the upper hand there already.
Yeah, as we said, no one wants to show all their cards. It's an early season matchup as well. It is really interesting, and I think Ireland is definitely a force to be reckoned with. Not particularly on the women's side, looking back at 2019, and the men with the club team Ranelagh have just won EUCF last year. I think this is definitely a sign that Ireland is strong on the European scene, and I think Germany has a strong mixed team, but some of their men players are going to play single gender again. They want to be good in every single division, and that obviously takes some talent away from a World Games squad from last year that was just the best of the best. And yeah, that we have to put that into consideration, that Germany as a mixed team was not performing as well at Euros in 2019, and they have had very strong single gender squads the last few rounds. So while we will see great things from them. I'm not sure if we can put them on the same on one level with Ireland in that particular field.
Yeah, talking about the World Games team as well, the two driving forces with the disc at that tournament that were so incredible, Anna Gerner and Nico Muller. Anna Gerner's playing in the women's team and Nico Muller's playing on the open team. So, as you said, Christina, the kind of spreading of the talent from the World Games team to all the three divisions is definitely going to make a difference there. But they still have some very good players. They still, as we talked about last week, have Levka Volchak. She's going to make an enormous difference. She is an incredible player. But interesting to see, and in the early going, that they are maybe a little step behind Ireland, although still plenty of time, lots of talent in the team. I think they had 28 players in the roster there this weekend. So it makes sense. Obviously, it's in Germany, so they have to travel a little less than everyone else, although I'm sure most of them have to travel to Frankfurt. But yeah, big roster, lots of talent. They had to come back a couple of times. They were 13-7 down against Ireland at one point, according to by the way, the scoring app for all people who are organising tournaments and that kind of stuff. The scoring app for this tournament in Germany was absolutely brilliant. You could track the breaks, you could track who scored when. Like, it was up and down. It was great, really, really good. Makes it much easier when no one wants anything streamed, so you can't get scouted, to have some excellent data available instead. So that was nice.
Yeah, I know that certainly there were questions probably asked by various people about why is it not being streamed? Why can't we watch it, etc. And I think it's that they don't necessarily want too much on film yet, even though you're playing against your biggest opponents. Like, you don't want them necessarily taking back and having everyone available to analyse that footage. And also, I think it's because they're explicitly kind of not the finished article. Like, they don't necessarily want teams to see them before they've got everything properly clicking.
Yeah, the most I saw of it was some kind of grainy's the wrong word, but not quite focused in Instagram footage on the German national Instagram page. Kind of difficult to scout people based on someone's phone on a sideline, really. But it was interesting seeing the results, and I'm sure when these teams get together in Limerick in July, we're going to see some fireworks. Should be interesting. Do either of you think, start with you, Christina, does this change your projected outcome for EUC? Do you now see France as the favourites?
I do think France showed up this weekend. I think we can reckon with them. I never put them out of the equation, honestly. Also, it's early. It's still really early. GB has not, like, they brought a very minimized squad. I don't think we can compare France and GB, for example, but like showing that France are taking it seriously and want to be part of the discussion and will be going forward. Like, that's something we can take from this weekend.
Benji, what do you think?
I don't think it's really changed my thoughts. And again, that's partly a way that the pool draw has shaken out, is that with the exception of France, the other Germany and Ireland, share a pool. And in fact, that's the opening game of EUC. So we see that literally right out the gate. GB are in a pool with Latvia, who are probably, I think, the first team out of this top four conversation. And those two pools cross against each other in power pools. So it looks fairly, like, at the risk of putting a target on people's backs and getting on a high horse, etc., like, it shakes out nicely for France to have a good path deep into the tournament. This maybe solidifies of people thinking, oh, maybe they're not going to be so hot, maybe they'll be knocked off on the way. I don't see that. So I think maybe it puts them up a peg or two, but I think most people, when you do the bracketology in your head and you math things out, probably had them going towards the semi-finals anyway.
Yep, I agree. The way the draw shaked out, it looked like it was going to be pretty good for France. This weekend kind of solidifies that they kind of favoured to get there because they are in the more favourable side of the draw, but they should be favoured to get there because they're one of the best teams in the draw. So
yeah,
really good to see. Really good to see that. I think, if EUC ends up the same way as this weekend, these four in order, it's going to be a very different way of getting there. If the outcome's the same, we won't get there the same way. I think there'll be some really close games and some pretty epic battles. So I look forward to that. So moving on to the tournament that you were both at the weekend, the club tournament in Austria, Vienna Spring Break. Christina, you were involved in organising Vienna Spring Break. Before we get to the results and all that kind of stuff, how was it organising it and then having to cancel the last games because of torrential rain? How did it all go?
It was stressful. The decision was made quickly because it was clear, like we prepared for it. We knew it was going to be bad weather. We thought about what games could be canceled, how we could modify the schedule, and I actually worked out 2 different varieties of the schedule on how to maybe do it if rain hit Saturday night or Sunday morning. And when Saturday was actually quite okay conditions and the pitches seemed really fine, I was so glad. And then when it happened for the last game, so the placement games on Sunday that were canceled, besides the final, I was actually pretty glad it was just the last game. And talking to representatives of the teams, they seemed a little glad they didn't have to play in that weather anymore. Even though always, if you travel to a tournament and you wanna, you prepare and you spend your whole weekend at this tournament, you want to play, obviously. But I think in the end, it worked out the best way it could have with that rain.
Yeah, if you're going to lose a game, losing the final game when your place has basically already been determined is 1 or 2. That's probably the best game to lose. Also means you can finish up early, and if you have flown in or travelled in, you can have a drink or 2 before you leave, I suppose. So if we look at the results, there's a few teams that are going to be competing at EU CF. It's going to be interesting seeing what some of these teams do in terms of kind of mixing together. There was a couple that were broken up that we'll talk about later on, but let's start with the women's division. So let's start with the Czech women. The Czech women have had a very interesting season so far. Obviously, they did well at Tom's. Close loss to Jinx on Universe. No shame at all. Jinx are a very, very good team. They did well at Spring Invite, and they did very well again here. So they look pretty well set up for EUC and the 2 club teams going forward.
Yeah, I think Czech Ultimate generally, and especially Czech Women's Ultimate, is in a super promising position. Thinking back to Joint Juniors last year in Wrocław in Poland, the first couple of days, the Czechs were maybe the talk of the tournament. And then I think as the week went on, maybe a bit of fatigue. They had some kind of tight, disappointing losses, and they kind of ran out of momentum a little bit. But you could see the talent, the young talent especially, really was there. And East Block epitomizes that. 3SB's done a very good job over the past few seasons of kind of making themselves a proper presence at the top end of European women's competition, and they've brought some players through as well. But in the past, they've kind of drawn talent, I think, from around a bit more disparately around the Czech Republic, and now rather than everyone kind of joining the one team, they've got enough together to form East Block as well. And East Block were, I think, comfortably the class of the women's division at VSB this weekend. I was so impressed with them.
Yeah, they've had a decent outing at Spring Invite, did well there. 3SB obviously were able to beat them there. This one, they were able to... Was it the other way around? So Spring...
East Block beat 3SB at Spring Invite on the way to...
And then lost in the final.
Lost to Shout in the final. They took Shout to Universe in the pool stage as well of Spring Invite. And then, as you say, you mentioned the Czech women did well at Tom's. And then, yeah, kind of... I don't want to say they walked to the title here, because I don't think anything about the way they play epitomizes them kind of doing things, walking at a leisurely pace. It'll be interesting to see how well they integrate with the women from 3SB again when everything gets together for EUC. But they played each other in the quarterfinals in a game that we streamed, and like you can tell that the kind of the hallmarks, the styles of Czech Ultimate are there. You know, they both have kind of multiple grinding zones. With East Block especially, they had quite a large roster, so they could really rotate players through, and they can wear you down. And when the disc turns over, they don't, they're not the sort of team that's just going to take their time, get into position, nice and organised. No, they pick it up and they go. It's not quite pure run and gun as it used to be. Thinking about especially the Toshnarova sisters, who just kind of generally like to, when there's a turnover, pick it up, and the first option is immediately look straight towards the end zone. They still have that a little bit, like everyone's really switched onto it, but they don't let you rest, they don't let you get a breath. It's pick it up and go. They're moving it when you're playing either match defense or especially against zone, they will keep the disc constantly ticking over. Loads of little sharp movements, and honestly, it's some of the best. I appreciate that it was my first event of the year, so like it's been a while since I've seen any live Ultimate, but I just thinking it's like they were so slick.
Recency bias? What is recency bias? Never heard of it. So, Christina, let's start with the club teams, East Block and 3SB. How good are the Czechs at the moment? How good are those two teams?
I think the quarterfinal we streamed was one of the best showings of Women's Ultimate I've seen in quite a while. I played at Spring Invite, so I'm a bit like maybe a bit more leveled on that recency bias thing than Benjy because he wasn't there. But the way they played, especially in the later stages of Spring Invite, so on Sunday and then coming out to Vienna Spring Break, it was very impressive. All 3SB as well, but they were only 13 players, I think. So that was a difference of maybe 10 people, which Saturday evening game, the fourth game they had that day, it's like it does make a big difference. But I think East Block really is a force to be reckoned with this year. They have a very similar style to 3SB. They also remind me a bit of Shout in their way of structuring their offense. And it really, so I think on offense, they put their best players on offense, and then their defense is stacked with athletic people that can run with you. And I do agree that East Block is like the one up-and-coming team this season. In the final against Box, my home team, so a bit of bias there as well, we saw that at times when their best few players were matched up on speed, they had a bit of a struggle. So I think this is the only way where they can still improve a little bit, matching up against people where they won't be dominant in just terms of pure speed, but then throw under pressure, run under pressure, and still show that they are that bit better.
They've got some really interesting players as well. I mean, it kind of headlined by, is it Christina Kluster? Is that how you pronounce it? Get that right?
Yeah.
She is
I believe it's Kluster. Yeah, you'll hear her often. I think her nickname's Kikcha. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I'll go with it.
I hope you haven't just sworn in Czech on this podcast. That would be a problem.
If I have, then I apologise, A, to the Czech Republic, and B, I've got to have a long word with a mum-to-be, I think.
Yeah,
about that one.
I think it's a nickname for Christina, actually.
But
in which case,
who knows
I feel
like
I'm on much safer ground now.
No.
She's probably, I was going to say the rising star. I think that star's kind of well and truly risen now. I remember back here, nearly 4 years ago now at EUC in 2019, when she was playing with the Czech women's squad there, and just hearing so much good about her then and seeing it. And you could tell that obviously still a young player, but she would be like, the potential was there to see. She's developed so much. She's never going to be a big physical presence, but that's fine. She doesn't need to be. She's certainly a presence in every other sense. She's got a big voice. She's kind of always full of energy on the sidelines as well, sprinting up and down. Like, she's a big leader on that team, whether when she's playing or when she's not. I was really impressed with their depth generally all around. Halvaltseva, I thought, was really solid in their handling core. Sometimes there are times when maybe they got a bit stuck and they wanted, like a bigger receiver downfield. Dolejalova, I thought, provided that for them as well. And there were a couple of times where they just kind of went back to maybe, you know what, we've got nothing on. We'll just play the long throws, because for a team that's not necessarily the tallest, they can absolutely jack it. They can fully go bombs away, I think, when they need to, which is great fun. Honestly, I know that it's a long season. Things will change. And how they integrate it all together for EUC is interesting. There'll be a quarterfinals team at EUC without a shadow of a doubt. Could they be a semi-finals team? I think when you say that Ireland, who were the winners last time, a lot of their talents kind of pulled on mixed as well. There's no Russia. They beat Switzerland this weekend, and I'm not sure it was entirely a full-strength Swiss women's team, but that is still taking on a national team that placed silver last time out, and they won not handily. Switzerland came back a little bit towards the end of the game, but I don't think there was ever a spot where East Bloc really had it out of control. I think that a semi-final berth for the Czechs is certainly not out of the picture.
Yeah, they played the Belgians at Tom's. Belgians won in pool, and then the Czechs avenged that in the final game. They didn't play GB at that tournament. We haven't yet seen France and Germany, Italy and Germany, who could be two of the best teams around as well. So it's going to be a crowded pool, I think, a crowded kind of group at the top of the women's division. But what we've seen from the Czechs, Christina, they can certainly push for that level. They seem to me to be talented enough and deep enough.
It really shows that they worked in the last 4 years. And we saw them in 2019. They did well, but there was still arguably some gap they had to close, and I think that gap is closing now. I do also think that East Bloc was not a full squad at Vienna Spring Break. I think they were missing a few pieces that will also strengthen them further.
Well, that's worrying.
Yeah.
Given how good they looked. Yeah. Like, it's always interesting as well when you have big players in your program who have to take a lesser role or have to step aside. And I think the Czechs look like they've got everything in place, that there's going to be no drop off. They've built that development, that program coming through where it's always good when you see a team that they've got like a good generation, and sometimes you see after that there's a drop off because there hasn't been that much focus on getting a new crop of players through. But I think the Czechs look like you don't produce this many good young players by accident. There's clearly been a focus on that, and that puts, regardless of kind of their results this year, it puts them in a really strong place going forward, I think.
So the Swiss women, I didn't see anything from the Swiss women. Were they on the stream? And it was just a game that I missed, Christina. I don't think I saw much of them. Did you see much of Switzerland?
Not really, unfortunately. I don't know if they were full strength. I want to doubt it a little bit, and also the fact that they were down by 4 points to East Bloc in the semifinal, and like we streamed the other semifinal, and we looked over every now and then, and they were down by 9 to 5 points at some point. So, and they came back a little bit, as Benjy already said, but in the end, I don't think they could have been happy with that performance. On the other hand, they did beat the team they played against in the quarterfinal 15 to 1. So
relatively comprehensive then.
I think it was 14-0 before Scram scored.
It was Scram, exactly, yeah, and it was 14-0.
That is an incredibly clutch way to avoid the bagel, though. Scoring on the final opportunity. That's a good job.
Yeah. So mixed feelings about that Swiss team, but
yeah,
I don't think they will show everything as we
as we talked about. They're going to keep something under their hats. Scram and Sick, two teams I do want to mention as we kind of wrap up a couple of other things on the women's side. Gravity have already qualified for EUCF, so they might not have to play UK nationals if they don't want to, which may mean an extra berth available for the Western region. So Scram and Sick, who both made quarterfinals at Vienna Spring Break, two teams who could be going to be pushing for that. So it'd be interesting to see what they do going through the rest of the season. I think there's an open and women's tournament that I think they're both at the beginning of June in the UK. So we'll be keeping an eye on how things look there for EUCF makeup. And then Box, as Christina talked about briefly, made the final against East Bloc and looked like they handled everybody other than East Bloc relatively well. So looks like they could be set up for a pretty good season.
They did have a close game against Sick in their quarterfinal. I heard it was a very good game from both sides, and all of them had a lot of fun playing. I do think that Sick and Box have always matched up to be around the same level, and I think that's what we can expect this season. we as Box, so Box had a lot of new additions. Vienna Spring Break as the home tournament was a very good opportunity to integrate younger players and players that's joined the squad this year. So Box didn't expect to be that good. They didn't expect, they of course, like the goal was to go as far as possible, but making the final wasn't the goal the team set for themselves.
An accidental final, always nice.
It's also worth pointing out that if anyone wasn't abundantly aware, Helen Terra is still the goddamn truth. Like, come on now.
All right, let's end the look at the women's division with that. Moving to the open division, we had two more Czech teams that looked like they were going to be the class of the kind of division here. FUI and 3SB, they've been combined for EuCF last year, certainly their dark and lights. One was 3SB, one was FUI. They were separate here, which we can get onto shortly, but it looked as though they were going to be the two best teams. FUI, well, the seeding was I don't know how you did the seeding, Christina, but it was something like 15-1 and 9 in the semi-finals. But it doesn't matter a great deal at the beginning of the season. But FUI and 3SB played in the semi. FUI won 12-10, went to the final. Fab beat Forward 13-11 in the other semi, but the Czechs ran away with the final, won 15-6, and never really looked in doubt. So, I mean, the Czechs, Benjy, what happened with the Czechs? Is this the two teams split up? Are they going to be going in separately for the rest of the season, or was this kind of a development plan?
This was, my understanding is that it was split kind of along O and D lines roughly. I think 3SB was the D line and FUI was the O line. It might have been the other way around. I cannot, but I think that's right. I guess from their perspective, it's unfortunate that they met in the semi rather than the final, although it was nice not to have an interclub matchup in the final of a tournament. So thanks, I appreciate that. It always kind of takes the sting out of it a little bit when it's the team's O-line making their D-line in a final. I think just splitting up to give them more reps, give them more practice. They did really well out at Spring Invite. They won Spring Invite, right, in Padova?
Yeah.
So they've already got an EuCF berth tight sealed up. And so I think that gives them maybe a bit more license to experiment now, knowing that they can tinker with things as the season goes on. They don't have to be peaking for regionals necessarily. You've got that berth there. I didn't get a chance to see the D-line, the 3SB side. The FUI side in the final was the only time we saw them, and they were electric. They were lights out. Crazy athleticism. The rain did not faze them at all. They absolutely pummeled Fab. Like, they just it looked like they broke them mentally a little bit, which is unusual. They were phenomenal. I know that we're kind of looking at Vienna Spring Break rather than looking ahead, but I'll start that again. At Elite Invite in a couple of weeks, they are FUI, the combined squad is in attendance. They're in Pool A, which is, I think, kind of generally agreed to be the more favourable of the pools. They've got Ranelagh, Heidi's, and Chevy, as opposed to Pool B, which is Clapham, Lofoten, Mooncatchers, and Wall City. So, ouch. And again, I think if you're FUI looking at that, you're targeting topping that pool, getting a favourable semi-final, quarter semi-final, and then looking at potentially going all the way to the final. FUI looked really hard. Yeah,
looking really, really good. Christina and I talked smack about the seedings there, but clearly making the semis better than the final, so good job. I apologise for all the insults. What did you see from the Czechs?
I think I do agree. FUI was the O-line, 3SB was a D-line, and I think that's something Czech Ultimate does in across divisions, stacking their O-line so they are perfect, and then putting I think I said that before, putting the athletic people on the D-line, which would make sense in this situation as well. And they were clinical, and they laid out for nearly everything. Their athleticism is crazy, and I think that you can definitely see Czech Ultimate moved up and are FUI are ready to crush that European scene this year. For the other teams, I think a lot of them weren't full strength. A lot of people were missing key pieces. Fab, I think, were in full strength forward. I want to say got a little lucky. And MUC, who won the tournament, I think the last 3 years, wanted to change their name, so they came as another team. He is from München because
so
all their
the record wasn't there that they lost it.
no.
Love
No,
that.
yeah,
Love that.
yes, the record wasn't there that they lost it, but it was because all of their players were either at mixed national team, at Frankfurt Invite, the mixed national team outing, or the under 20, under 24 outings. And so I think we can see that it's a national team's year.
All right, we'll give them a pass for turning up with a different name if they didn't have most of their players. Fine. But I do love the calling forward lucky. I'm here for some shades. That's good stuff.
We streamed the forward versus Austria under 24 quarterfinal. I wasn't calling that game, which I was glad about. A, because it's nice to have a break, and B, because it was not the finest display of ultimate I think we've seen.
Christina's laughing.
Yeah, I called that game. Under 24 squad is still connecting pieces. I think that was the first tournament where they had everyone and played together, and it was a bit of a courtesy that we gave them the spot. I think they performed well, and I'm glad we did that. But other teams that lost their quarterfinal, way harder path towards the semis than forward did.
Very diplomatic. All right, well, an interesting tournament, obviously, with teams that weren't at full strength, and obviously there were some teams there who haven't been at EUCF in a while. We weren't, I suppose, going into it, weren't sure exactly how much we can learn, but we have really learned a lot about the Czechs and how strong they look, and got a good look at some of the teams as well. So that's a good wrap on Vienna Spring Break. We will take a quick break here before we come back to talk about the Belgium Invite coming up at the weekend. You take the field with basically two things, yourself and your cleats. That's why you need the best on your feet. For me, I want comfort and I want reliability. I want to know my feet aren't going to be slipping out from underneath me, and Tokay cleats are specifically designed for ultimate. The toe stud helps you get in and out of your cuts quickly. You can't get that on a soccer cleat. You won't find much ankle support in soccer cleats either, or a fabric-based upper that helps cool off your feet, especially great for long days on turf. That's why they are the official cleat of elite players like Ben Ort and Lev Kovalchuk in Europe. So you try to put your best self on the field. Make sure you're bringing the best with you at tokay-ultimate.com. All right, coming back, let's preview the Belgium Invite. It's another international team invite to whet our appetites for EUC. This time it is in the open division. There were supposed to be 6 teams coming to the tournament, but I believe the Swiss are now no longer to attend, so it's just the 5. So we'll start with the home team, Belgium. We have talked a lot about Belgium and Belgian teams last week because we saw them at Tom's. Obviously, Mooncatchers won Tom's tournament. This time we'll be seeing the Belgian national team rather than the under-24s who made the semis at Tom's. There's quite a few of those under-24s on the team. Dan Demare, the De Crane brothers, Ben Jonkers, Sofyan Bontemps, Nicolas Hoquez. They're all on the team. I believe that's it. So some kind of important players doing double duty. They'll be coming off on the 24s at EUC, but I'm sure a home tournament, it's just outside Brussels this weekend, they're going to look pretty good. I mean, we've discussed Belgium a lot, Benjy. Is there any more to say about Belgium and how good we expect them to be at EUC?
No, let's move on. That's I'm being a little bit glib there. It's interesting.
Really?
I always find interesting how well a country's national side compares to their best club side. Like for the UK, for example, Great Britain tends to be as strong, maybe if not a bit stronger than Clapham in the open division. Like Ireland women was kind of collectively stronger than Just Gravity was. Great Britain has kind of been a bit up and down in mixed, but it always comes together for EUC, for example. And I wonder whether Belgium as a nation will be as good as Mooncatchers are as a team, because without diminishing the Belgian talent on moon catchers and elsewhere in the nation, like you could see that some of the imports have played a big role over the past year and a bit or so on moon catchers, and whether they can get the other pieces to kind of to fill in, whether they can all gel and find that play style. Given what we know about all the Belgian teams, really, the play style will be brilliant if it works, and if it doesn't work, could look a little bit ugly. But the talent is definitely there for them to be at the top end of Euros. The talent is 100% there. How well it all comes together, especially with under 24s coming up beforehand, and I know they want to make a big old crack at that. That is interesting.
Christina, if we had a European Championships where we took only 10 players from each country, the top 10 players from each country, how are Belgium doing there? Do you think Belgium would win that? Is their top 10 the strongest in Europe at the moment? I realise I've just thrown this at you. So
yeah. Okay, I do think that they would be in the running. I think they'd be, in my opinion, they'd be in the top 3 with GB, and then with, okay, let's say top 4 with France and Germany and GB. Maybe, I don't know. I do think that their young talent is impeccable, and it was too early the last cycle, but really worked and done so much to improve themselves as individual players, and now coming together as a team in the Belgium and as a Belgium national team. This work will pay off on Mooncatcher's side, but also Gentle, who have been tirelessly working and producing youth. And I think the one thing that is very special for Belgian Ultimate, and one could maybe compare to Italian Ultimate, is the way they train their youth and give them space to grow into these roles. I want to, like the Decrane brothers and the Marais, people that, like young men that have had experience in the European scene for years and years. They will just now, growing up to in their early 20s, crush every other player that maybe started in their late teens, and they can run with them now and have as much experience, and I think that'll really pay off for them this year.
Yep, agreed. I'm really looking forward to seeing how they're doing. Putting the Belgian team together is going to be very exciting. They're playing against GB, who in a lot of ways are kind of a different part of their team building philosophy. They have obviously a lot of veterans, a lot of people who played for GB and for Clapham for many years. Not least Justin Ford, obviously, but also, Ollie Gordon, Ben Funk, James Mead. These guys have been around with GB and Clapham for a long time. Reigning EUC champions, beat Germany last time round, faltered against Moon at Tom's even. Their dumps and their kind of discontinuation seem to slow down, particularly late in the game. Benjy, I mean, are they going to come with anything new, or do you think it's a case of refining things at this tournament heading in towards Limerick?
I think at this point, knowing how kind of meticulously they'd planned things, I'd be very surprised if they suddenly decided, okay, we've got to throw new wrinkles in there. It'll be stuff we might not have seen, but they'd have been working on. And as you mentioned, the bits we have seen, it will be fine-tuning them and refining them. Again, like, it's a big, like, the core of that team is Clapham. So integrating those players who play with other clubs into that, there will be obviously a little bit of connectivity issues, maybe getting all those players happy in that environment. It's also interesting, like, looking at, as you mentioned, it's a more veteran squad. You'd have been well within your rights, looking at 4 years ago, thinking how many of those players are going to have another cycle at EUC, and turns out the answer is most of them.
Yeah, a lot of them.
Like, so I would say that looking at some of those names, like, are they going to do another cycle with Great Britain, or is this going to be their quote unquote last hurrah? But as I said, the fact that we were thinking this about maybe some of them 4 years ago, I'm wise enough to not call Justin Ford old. Like, that is an absolute hiding to nothing. Like, old is relative, right? I'm 30 and I feel absolutely ancient, whereas Nas is in his 40s now and is still an absolute titan, for example.
Good wisdom. I don't really want to talk too much more about GB. I'm sure we'll talk about them later in the year, and everyone knows how good they've been. So let's move on to a team that we haven't seen so far this year in Italy. Italy are not only bringing their senior team, also their under-24 team. So 2 Italian teams are there, and that is an interesting discussion point on the Italian approach, actually, that Christina mentioned earlier. So Italy in... When was it 2017 Perth? Was that 2017?
2018.
2018. January, February 2018, wasn't it? Yeah, they pushed America incredibly close in that final and got as close as any European team has come in a long time to knocking off a senior American team. And then did all right again in Heidelberg, finished 3rd there, best European team. And they've routinely focused on under-24s rather than at Euros. They certainly did that in 2019. They had some of their best male players on the under-24 team rather than going to Euros with the senior team. And they have 2 players in particular playing on the under-24 team who you would guess would have made the senior team. The under-24 team is very good. There's a lot of players who went to EUC F with either La Fota or Costa Rica last season, 15 of them by my count from the squad that I've seen. But La Fota kind of cutters, Sebastian Rossi and David Barsazzi are very, very good players. Barsazzi in particular adds a kind of element of athleticism downfield that La Fota certainly really benefit from. So being without him, the senior team is going to be interesting. But if we look at the under-24 team first, you've got those 2 players. You also have several of the players that won a bronze medal at JJUC. Eduardo Fabri, I know, was excellent with the disc, Benjy, but you also have Matteo Paradisi and Lorenzo Simonazzi. Those 3 were the top 3 in stats. There's a couple of others. They've been the class of Europe at under-24 for the last few cycles. Do you think they're going to have enough to compete with senior international teams at this tournament? And then how are we looking going into Nottingham?
I'd put them probably a rung below the senior teams. I think part of that is just you're a bit less experienced, but they're not going to be rolled over and have their tummies tickled, like, especially just because you kind of know what they are like as characters. They can be a little bit bold and brash, which partly comes with youth, partly comes with being Italian, and partly just comes from who you are as a person. Like, a lot of these players, we'd have seen them, as you mentioned, either representing U24 maybe, 4 years ago now in Heidelberg, or last year at JJUC in under-20s, and even then before that, going back to youth EYUC in 2017 in Veenendaal and 2019 in Wrocław. Like, you see these players come through the systems, and you see them develop. Like, Rossi has all the makings of a star. Like, he's big, he's athletic, he's crazy fit. He just plays with a bit of pomp and swagger. Like, he has that. You're right to mention Barzassi, who is great downfield, but just plays like with the comfort and control of a veteran. Paradisi, again, is another insane athlete you've got downfield. Fabri was brilliant. You're seeing games in the bracket at JJUC last year where he's racking up 7 assists and a goal or 2, and he's contributing to over half of the Italian points. Like, he can be that workhorse for them. I'd probably still put them a notch below the senior team, but the fact that under-24s becomes before EUC this year, whereas 4 years ago EUC was before under-24s, I think is huge for Italy, because some of the best under-24 players kind of didn't play or only played a little at EUC because they were taking another run at potentially going for gold at under-24s, having pushed USA all the way in the final in Perth a year and a half previously. In the end, it didn't pay out, and they only came out third, as if that's some horrible result. They were brilliant in that tournament, but I know that they were targeting higher. The fact that under-24s is beforehand and means that they will have all of those youth players available at EUC is huge.
What do you think, Christina? They've obviously benefited from their approach because they're bringing some brilliant players into the senior team. You look at some of the players that were on that team in Perth, and they are now mainstays of the senior team. So this approach is really working for Italy.
I would agree. The pipeline they've cooked up in Bologna and the other cities surrounding Padova and Rimini, it's crazy. And I think the work that people put in there should be like more people should do that more. That's how you grow ultimate. And I absolutely agree. While it's maybe not the best thing for the Belgians that the under 24s is earlier, it's a really good thing for the Italians because they obviously put a lot into those world events. They're more important for them. I think it's just it's amazing to see those pieces put together on a national team when Rossi and Basazi are both from Rimini. They moved to Bologna to study, and now they're with La Fota. But like them playing with people and playing with people from Rimini, from Padova, like putting those pieces together from systems that are also very similar, I think will work out very well for the Italians. And I think you can really compare Belgium Ultimate and Italian Ultimate, and maybe also the Czech Ultimate that we've been talking so much about, that they have very similar systems in their countries, which makes combining the teams towards those national events easier. And I think, that is something that they did very well in developing their programs.
Interesting point, kind of combining things a bit like in football with all the youth teams at Ajax playing the same way. So when you bring players through, they can kind of fit in. It's an interesting point that they fit in well together. I mean, if we look at the Italian senior team, we've focused on the under-24 team to start with, but the senior team is going to be very good. They have a lot of familiar names, a lot of La Fota's kind of cornerstones of their recent success. Gasparini, Laffi, Santucci, Tognetti, Trombetti, Zani, they're all on this squad. It's going to be a really good team. We know that they can play that kind of La Fota style where they're very slick, move the disc very quickly. They take advantage of whatever matchups they can find, and their match D is absolutely stifling. So we know we're going to see that. If they're missing a couple of their downfield cutters, Rossi, Barsazzi, etc., are they going to have the cutting player to stay close to Belgium in GB here? And one would assume Germany as well in Limerick. Benjy, do you think that they are a competitor for the top four? Is that their ceiling?
Yeah, I think the ceiling for them is, depending on how things shake out, the ceiling for them is definitely a finals place. I think semi-finals is a more likely ending point for them. There's no way they don't make the quarterfinals. Like that just is not happening. If that is not happening, I'll drink a bottle of olive oil or something. I don't know. Something else culturally insensitive.
Now I am really, I hope that, nothing against the people of Italy, obviously, but I hope they don't make it. I am 100% going to hold you to that.
But they will, so it'll be fine.
I actually think that not having the two cutters won't make as big of a difference for Italy, because their style of play and they're on the field, they don't separate handlers from cutters as GB would normally do. Every player on that La Fota team can throw as well as they can run, or nearly every player. So, like, minimizing the singular use of players is something that I think Italy have done very well over their whole programs in women's and men's. And I do think that while these players like Basazi and Rossi will be missing if they're not full strength or not on the team at all because they are focusing on Worlds, I do think that with the style they're playing, which is just moving the disc quickly rather than starting from static situations, I think it might not even make that big of a difference.
I don't.
So if you move. Oh, go on. Sorry, Benjy.
I don't see them winning this weekend, but I think they'll be better at EUC than they are here. I mean, everyone will be better, but I think they'll be better relatively.
So if we move on to the final team that are going to be there, with the Swiss dropping out, it's the Dutch. Now, the Dutch are a good team. They have some good players. or at least that was the thinking going to Tom's. They've got, enough to be pretty competitive, but they were surprising at Tom's. We talked about this a bit last week with Ravi, who's coaching the Dutch men's team, but they surprised, I think, a lot of people and came out very strong. They looked really good. They look like they are a team to actually, people need to focus on whether, if you're playing against the Dutch and you're not playing at your best and you're not giving it everything you've got, I think the Dutch definitely have enough to upset pretty much anyone in Europe if they don't put anything into the game. So they are going to be, it's going to be interesting to see how they can hang with, 3 of the top 4 or 5 teams in Europe, plus obviously the Italian under-24 team, which is very talented. This is going to be a real crucible for them this weekend, I think. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle it. Do you see it going well, Christina? Do you think they've got enough to at least make all these games competitive?
I think it's really interesting because we know the Dutch are known for their mixed team,
Yeah.
And both the women's and the men's side have previously put in single gendered teams for Toms. And while the women have always performed, the men have not previously. And now this year around, the men actually did perform. They did rather well. They had close games, whereas women kind of lacked at times. They were still good, maybe not as good as we expected. And I do think that we might have to overthink and reevaluate the damage they can do in the divisions with the focus on single gender play. And I would agree, if the Dutch have a very good game, you have to be on your top game to stop them as well. I seem to remember some situations where mental stability and mental composure was an issue, and I wonder if in that setting this will be something they will work on and come back stronger to form the mixed squad for EUCF, with taking on bigger roles respectively.
What do you think, Benjy? Are the Dutch going to be? Is it going to be a tough weekend for them? I mean, I think it sounds like me and Christina both agree that they have the ability to compete with anybody, if not potentially beat them if they're playing brilliantly. But they've definitely got the potential to really push people hard.
Yeah, I think when they're on form, they can definitely take games off the teams here, especially depending on how keyed in everyone is this weekend, right? Because same things we said at the top of the show about the Frankfurt Invite also apply here. Teams, they're going to want to test and work on things, but 100% do not expect them to open up the full playbook, right? They'll just be using kind of the bare minimums just to get things in place. We might see a little bit here. I say we might see it. We probably won't see it given how close everyone likes to play things. But you get what I mean. We're not going to see everyone at their most. And if the Netherlands say, okay, we've been practicing stuff and we will throw it out here, they could take games. Is that the best thing for them to do? They might be better off actually just, again, saying we're not too fussed about the results. It's about, are we performing in these kind of systems, these categories, these things that we're looking for? Like, how are we in the process? Maybe there's a section of a game where we say, okay, we're going to treat this as like a mini game to 5 and we'll throw everything out there here. Are we hanging with teams in those specs? Can we beat teams when we're on form? I think long term, the ceiling at EUC, I think, is probably about a semi-final berth. But I can't remember how the open division completely shakes out. Like, when all the best players are on form, like we have seen that. We've seen players like Furka Schaap have an increasing presence on Groot. Joran Mossink's played pretty much everywhere, I think, at this point, and we know what he's all about. Johan van der Woede had a huge impact for Isnogood last year, so he's also, that gives him experience playing in different environments and, winning big tournaments as well, because of course they won Toms and French Nationals last year. Like, they have players who have done it. I wouldn't surprise me if they win some games this weekend. I don't have them overall on quite the same level.
Yeah, it's EUC. They've got GB in the pool, so it's going to be interesting or at least they're going to be interested to see what GB have got and trying to match up against them. But obviously, once we get to power pools, as with every division, we're going to see how things shake out there. That's when the tournament really starts. I think for all of the elite teams, the tournament really starts in power pools. So seeing GB and Netherlands match up might give us something of an indication of how those two teams might get on at EUC. But as we've talked about the whole podcast, everyone is going to be keeping things a little on the down low and trying not to empty the playbooks at this stage. So let's finish by predicting in true EuroZone fashion how this weekend is going to go from 1 to 5. So the teams, just to remind both of you and everybody listening, are GB, Italy, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And then you've got the Italian under-24 team. So I will start with Benjy. Where are you saying everyone's coming?
I confidently predict Switzerland for the wooden spoon, having not attending, which is cheating, I know.
Gimme.
This is going to sound very boring. Great Britain 1. I'll go Belgium 2 because of Italy splitting their resources, and I'll take the senior Italy team over the U24s. So Italy 3, and I'll put the Italian under-24s 4th and Netherlands 5th, and I expect to get it from all sorts of directions, mostly Northern European directions, in about a week's time if that doesn't come off.
I love that you said the Dutch team have the ceiling of a semi-finals team and you picked them to finish last. Just great podcasting, fantastic stuff.
Do you know how a ceiling works? I'm not saying that they're guaranteed to finish in the semi-finals.
The floor is in the basement. The floor is in the basement.
Exactly. The ceiling's the roof.
Christina, your top 5.
I'm gonna go a bit different. I'm gonna say Belgium will beat GB in the final.
Okay.
I'm gonna put my trust in the Netherlands.
Here we go.
Say they'll be 3rd, and then Italy in 4th, and Italy under 24 is in last place.
Wussing out of not putting Italy under 24s ahead of Italy. I don't respect that quite so much, but Netherlands 3rd, good stuff.
I assume then, given your smack talk, that you're going to put Italy under 24 in front of the senior team then, yes, Sean?
No, I'm going very chalk because I want to win this prediction competition, but I'm going Belgium 1, I agree with Christina. I'm going GB 2, Italy 3rd, Netherlands 4th, and Italian under 24s 5th. That is my 1 to 5. Very different groupings, which I enjoy. Given that last week we all had pretty similar stuff and we were all completely wrong. So great work, everybody. Well, as you can tell, it's been another pretty interesting and intriguing week for European Ultimate, and we have more coming because not only do we have the Belgian Invite tournament this weekend, but the weekend after, as we've kind of referenced a little bit in this podcast, we had the Elite Invite in Bern, so we'll be back next week to preview that. I've been thinking about what we do for the sign-off. I know Liam was famous for his sign-off, but I don't think you can replace Liam Grant with one person in particular. So what I'll be doing is replacing him with a legion of people. So it'll be the guests who do the sign-off. Christina, this week you can do the sign-off. My name is Sean Colfer. I've been joined by Benjy and Christina. And over to you, Christina.
I'm going to quote Benjy on this and say we will see you on the other side.
Train roll up and out. I come walking out.